a few months ago, I made a deck that I adored. And then I realized that I wanted to keep on tuning it and playing it and bringing it to local tournaments. And now we're here. Now we are remaking my own Niv Mizzet video for the very first time. I've not done a deck remake. Normally I have a policy, and that policy is that if I have a deck that I make any modifications to, I will make those modifications in the Moxfield list so that people have access to that, so that as I'm tuning a deck, they can see, oh, this thing in here is different from the original video. That must have been some change that happened because he was playing the deck in paper, and here we are. If you haven't noticed that, then, hi, this is a public service announcement that if a deck is different in the Moxfield list than what is shown in the video, that's because I was tuning the deck in paper and found that certain cards worked better than others. But this particular deck has had so many modifications, about 30 cards of modifications from what was originally present in that video, that I think it's important to make a new deck. So let's go ahead and get into the core strategy of Niv Mizzet Reborn. Niv Mizzet Reborn is a 5-color commander who has flying, 6/6, costs exactly Wooburg, and when it enters the battlefield, you reveal the top 10 cards of your library, and then for every single color pair that you can find among them, put one of those cards into your hand. This basically means if you find a red-green card, a red-blue card, and 2 blue-black cards, you can put a maximum of 3 cards in your hand with that variety that's available to you, because you can't double up on the blue-blacks. But this also means that you can't put in 3-color cards in the deck because Niv Mizzet can't see those. He needs to see exact color pairs. You don't get to say, well, this card is technically 3 colors, but 2 of those colors are ones I haven't picked yet, so I guess I'll go ahead and pick those. No, that doesn't work with Niv. So our strategy in the original build was to make a Spellslinger deck that won via burn damage, and I learned something the more I played the deck. I had actually made a huge mistake. In that original build, the burn damage came from slinging a ton of spells at our opponents. But the problem I ran into was that most of the cards that benefit from that spell slinging couldn't actually be picked up from Niv. This meant that in most of the games that I played with Niv Mizzet Reborn, I would frequently just cycle through those burn cards, and they might not even ever make it into my hand, basically permanently existing on the bottom of my deck. In fact, here is past me being very, very stupid, talking about the 8 different burn spells I was incorporating into the deck, only 2 of which could actually be grabbed with Niv Mizzet, Pink Horror and Torwalkie the Younger. Over time, I ended up cutting so many of these cards that I basically was left with Pink Horror, Crackling Perimeter, and Torwalkie. But I also ended up realizing that in games where I had Pink Horror and Torwalkie in my hand, I didn't have the mana to play them. And that wasn't for lack of having mana in general, that was because being a budget deck, I needed to focus almost all of my energy on stalling the other players at the table instead of zeroing in on winning myself. And Torwalkie and Pink Horror, unfortunately, did not yield enough damage to close out games on their own without all of this supplementary stuff, so eventually those ended up getting cut too. So this original burning strategy has basically been cut down to only 1 card now. So yeah, in the current version of this list, one of the core strategies we have access to is Burn, and the only card that is going to facilitate that strategy on its own is Crackling Perimeter, which will deal 1 damage to each opponent for every gate we control. I guess that kind of throws out the idea already of what deck we're going to be playing. We're going to be playing a gates deck, but we don't want to win with the Maze's End win condition of gates, because I'm going to be honest, I find that win condition leads to some more boring games. A lot of players don't tend to remove lands when they need to, and getting the win off of Maze's End has never really felt that great to me, whereas slowly getting the win off of something like Crackling Perimeter does actually feel pretty decent, and it works very well with what our deck is doing, since we want to hold up mana on our opponent's turns anyway, and if we don't need to spend that mana immediately, we can sink it into the perimeter to punish our opponents for not playing cards that we're strong enough for us to feel like we needed to remove. Another issue that I ran into in the original version of the deck was, much like not being able to find my burn pieces with Niv Mizzet's core ability, I couldn't find the blink pieces, which were one of the main ways the deck was going to draw through its cards. So in the original version, I had 9 blink spells, but those spells hardly ever actually saw any play, because aside from Vanish into Memory and Abuelo, Infuse with Vitality requires the board state to get wiped for it to really work, and everything else was either too slow or could not be grabbed immediately with Niv Mizzet, OG being one of the slow ones that still sees play in my current build. But now I've trimmed it down to this blink package. Everything is searchable with Niv Mizzet, and the majority of my Azorius picks have been here. So we still have Abuelo in here, who can exile a creature and then return it to the battlefield under our control, and this allows us effectively to dodge bullets with Niv Mizzet, but more importantly, this lets Niv Mizzet touch the board again, drawing us a fresh clutch every single time we do so, which allows us to play this burn control strategy more effectively. The more cards we have in hand, the more ways we can answer our opponent's stuff. I've included Turn to Mist in the deck and Mist Meadow Witch. Both of them allow us to blink stuff like Abuelo does. OG is in here, just like in the original build, because he allows us to blink Mizzet if a second spell is ever cast. And then we have Disorder in the Court, which will exile any number of creatures, and then we investigate X times, which will give us a bunch of clues we can use to draw, while also letting us get our Mizzet out of the way. Most of the time, we're going to be casting this just for 3, which will give us 1 draw, and then the massive draw from Mizzet. And I recognize that, this is technically the draw section of the deck as much as anything else, but let's be honest, the dedicated draw, you're going to find it kind of funny when we get to it. Before we get to that draw, though, there is one more major part of the deck that I want to go over, and it is the fact that we are effectively playing a Niv Mizzet tribal deck in disguise. We are running 4 other Niv Mizzets, basically every Mizzet we could shove in at our price point, which is currently $15.43, with 93 of those cents being our commander. But Niv Mizzet Supreme is the first one we have in here. I would have liked to put Guild Pact in, but he doesn't serve any real purpose in our deck. But Supreme allows us to cast our instants and sorceries, of which we have 15 sorceries and 28 instants from our graveyard. It lets us give them Jumpstart, which is fantastic for what our deck is doing. Then we have Niv Mizzet the Fire Mine, which can tap to draw us a card, while also being able to deal 1 damage to any target anytime we draw a card. Then we've got Niv Mizzet Perun, who can't be countered, and anytime we draw a card, we deal 1 damage to a target, and if a player casts an instant or sorcery spell, we will draw a card. Then we finally have Niv Mizzet Draco Genius. Whenever this deals damage to a player, we can draw a card, and it can let us pay 2 mana to deal 1 damage to any creature or player. A removal card, while also being a fun mana sink that can aid in our burn strategy if we choose to go that route. Otherwise, these Mizzets are effectively draw packages in and of themselves, and if you feel like being really cheeky, you could add in Curiosity or Phrydian Eye into the deck as well, just to have a quick 2-card infinite combo if you wanted to go there. But I'm going to be honest, don't do that. You'll have a lot more fun if you play this deck as it's intended. Trust me. Finally, we have a couple surprise I win cards that will aid in the burn strategy by giving us the ability to pivot into Voltron, and also letting us benefit from the Gate package a lot in 2 separate ways. One of these is Glaive of the Guild Pact, which will give a creature 1/0 for every gate we control, and it will give it Vigilance and Menace, which is super powerful in our deck. And then we have Debt to the Deathless, which will make every single opponent lose 2 times X life, where X is the amount of mana that we pay into it besides the double Orzhov cost. And then we will gain life equal to the life lost this way. This is a fantastic way to close out games, and if we've already already been doing burn with our gateway cards and just hitting people with Mizzet, this should help us close out a lot of games very, very easily. The final way we have to surprise win in somebody's face is Basilisk Gate, which is a gate we'll talk about later, but primarily its purpose in this deck is to give a creature XX, where X is the number of gates we have, and since we are running 21 gates, we can easily get our commander up to lethal levels of power and then punch somebody in the face very, very hard. It's very often somebody's able to infinitely chump block flyers, so this should be able to kill every opponent very, very easily. Alright, let's talk about the draw power in this deck. It's basically all Niv Mizzet and the other Niv Mizzets that are in the deck. I've already talked about them. But if I wanted to talk about some dedicated draw pieces in the deck, we have two of those. We have a Eureka Moment and a Dihada's Ploy. Dihada's Ploy lets us draw 2 and discard 1, and it's got Jumpstart, so we can cast it once more from the grave. And Eureka Moment draws us 2 and then throws a land from our hand onto the battlefield at instant speed. Both of these are 2-color cards, and so they can be grabbed with Mizzet, and I have nothing more to say about this. Let's move to the next section. So the length of this section may make up for the lack of length of the draw power section, since we have to talk about 28 different removal and interaction pieces alongside 4 board wipes. This is a control deck. We are going to be controlling a lot of things. That's really weird looking at Zimone looking at me like that. Anyway, let's get into the first of these cards, Augur Spree. This will give a creature 4/4, +4, -4, that is, for Rakdos and 1. So this serves a few purposes in our deck. 1, getting rid of creatures who are otherwise indestructible is super important, but also having the ability to pump up Niv Mizzet to potentially lethal somebody in the middle of combat is also really, really good. For Rakdos, we also have Deadly Complication, which can blow up a creature or put 1/1 on a suspected creature. That's never going to happen. Then we have Agony Warp, which can make a creature get -3/0 or -0/3. You either use this to kill a creature outright, or make sure that a flyer that's trying to kill Mizzet will actually be weaker than him in combat. Either way, the card has proven its worth for the 3 pennies that it takes in our deck's budget. Final Payment can blow up any creature for the cost of 5 life. This also gives us the ability to sacrifice our Niv Mizzet to recast him so that we can draw more cards if we feel ourselves running out. Then we have Status and Statue. Status can give a creature 1/1 and Death Touch until end of turn, and Statue can blow up an artifact, creature, or enchantment. That's most of the card types you care about killing anyway. Then we have Ionize, which can counter a spell and then deal 2 damage to that spell's controller, aiding just a little bit in our burn strategy, not a whole lot. Otherwise, it's just a really easy to cast Omni Counterspell. Decimate allows us to blow up an artifact, creature, enchantment, and land. You have to have every single one of these cards on the board available for sacking, or available for killing when you play it, so every now and again you might need to blow up one of your own things, like your own Niv Mizzet, so that you can get more draws. That happens sometimes. Then we have Nature's Chant, which can blow up an artifact or enchantment for Selesnya. Rip Apart, which can blow up an artifact, enchantment, or deal 3 damage to a creature or a planeswalker for Boros. Putrefy on the Golgari side can blow up an artifact or creature, and then it can't be regenerated. Utter End on the Orzhov side gives us the ability to exile any non-land permanent. Lightning Helix for Boros lets us deal 3 damage to a target and gain 3 life. Soul Manipulation can counter a creature spell and then return a creature from our graveyard to our hand, and it can do both. Card is cracked in this deck. Legion to Ashes can exile any non-land permanent an opponent controls, and then every token they have that have the same name as that permanent. If you're fighting a clones deck or any type of mass token deck, this can effectively double as a board wipe for that player. Void Slime is now budget thanks to the various reprints it got in 2 sets, both Ravnica and Thunder Junction. So this lets us counter a spell or activated ability or a triggered ability, one of the most versatile counter spells we have access to. Mortify lets us destroy a creature or enchantment. V-Spark lets us exile any permanent with converted mana cost 4 or greater. Mortality Spear lets us blow up a non-land permanent for Golgarian 2. Sundering Growth lets us blow up an artifact or enchantment, then populate, which we probably never will, but without this, the deck only has 2 Selesnya targets. So to make sure that we have more, Sundering Growth is this here as another way of blowing up artifacts and enchantments. Casualties of War lets us blow up an artifact, creature, enchantment, land, and a planeswalker in any order and however many we care. Well, not really in any order. It's worded like Rankle, but the idea is that we can get as many or as few of these effects as we need. Bedevo lets us blow up an artifact, creature, or planeswalker. Double Negative can counter up to 2 target spells. Undermine can counter a spell and then burn that player for 3. Absorb can counter a spell and then gain 3 life for us. Repulsive Mutation's another way we have to pump Mizzet for game, putting X 1/1 counters on a creature and then countering any spell unless its controller pays mana equal to the greatest power among creatures we control, and the greatest power will always be Mizzet. Then we have Rakdos Charm, which can exile all cards from a graveyard, blow up an artifact, or make a token player cry by dealing 1 damage to them for every token they have. That's not what's written on the card, but that's effectively how it's going to feel. Then we have Hull Breach, which can blow up an artifact or an enchantment, or it can blow up an artifact and an enchantment. Then we have Drown on the Lock, which for Dimir can counter a spell with mana value less than or equal to the number of cards in a player's graveyard, or destroy a creature with the same parameters. Card is incredibly good, and it's one of the highest cost cards in the deck budget-wise. If you really needed to shave the deck's budget down a little bit, you could swap this out for any other 2-color removal spell, but I was willing to smidge the budget just a little bit to fit it in. It makes perfect sense as a wonderful card in the deck. But that's not all. We also need to go over the board wipes in the deck, of which there is 1 addition on top of the ones that were originally in the deck. Solar Blaze is a Boros card to make all creatures deal damage to themselves equal to their power. Kaya's Wrath blows up all creatures and gives us a little bit of life gain. Find and Finality can either take 2 of our Mizzets from the grave and put them in our hand, or put 2 1/1 counters on Mizzet himself and then give all creatures -4/-4. And Time Wipe can put Mizzet into our hand and then destroy every other creature on the board, letting us recast Mizzet to get a nice, clean, new hand. All in all, there is a lot of control going on in this deck, and it is a deck that's sole purpose is to make sure that other players cannot win the game while you get to the board state you need to win yourself. And I have been thoroughly enjoying that game plan because it allows you to basically be the babysitter of all things Magic the Gathering for a very long time. This next section's a bit interesting. I went a bit overboard with the ramp stuff in the original version of the deck, adding a Letter of Acceptance, a Goblin Electromancer, and some other things into that original build. As I've been playing the deck, I found that with the gate package, you don't actually need all of that. You just need to focus hard in on what the gates are doing and let them do their thing as best they can. That will generally lead to a victory in and of itself without you having to try super hard to get Wooburg on the board otherwise. So, likewise, let's go ahead and focus on those gates in this version of the deck, starting with District Guide. District Guide enters the battlefield and gives us a basic land or a gate card from our deck and puts it into our hand. Silver and Scrying can search our library for any land card and put it into our hand. Circuitous Route can search our library for 2 lands that are either basic or gates and put them on the battlefield tapped. Explore the Underdark does that while also giving us access to the initiative, because I will always shove a dungeon in if I can. And gate decks give me access to shoving dungeons in decks. Then we have Open the Gates, which is a sorcery, which gives us a gate or basic land from our deck into our hand. Gate Creeper Vine, which is a defender creature, which gives us a gate into our hand from the deck. And Navigation Orb, which can sacrifice itself to get 2 basic lands or gates onto the battlefield and in our hand, respectively. Now, these cards are really, really powerful and really, really cheap, but Navigation Orb, it should be noted, is fairly clunky. We basically have to pay 5 mana for an incredibly worse version of Explore the Underdark, with the added benefit that there aren't that many gate fetches in the game to begin with, and Navigation Orb is colorless, so it is fairly good at what it does. But as for basic ramp, we're only running 8 other ramp besides what's in the deck, starting with Road and Ruin, which Niv Mizzet will see as a Gruul card while it is on the top of the deck. Instant cast, search your library for a basic land, put it on the battlefield tapped, and then Ruin gives us our 29th targeted removal spell, since it can deal damage to a creature equal to the number of lands we control. Mere Convert is a 2-mana creature that we can pay 2 life into to add a mana of any color. Wonderful colorless option we have in budget decks. Arcane Signet does the same thing, but as a non-creature, and Ornithopter of Paradise does the same thing, but as a flyer, with the added benefit that we don't have to pay 2 life for the Signet or the Ornithopter of Paradise. Commander Sphere gives us a draw in a pinch while also being an Omni ramp piece. Honored Heirloom gives us the same kind of Omni ramp, but also gives us access to graveyard removal to keep graveyard players honest, because we have a little bit of graveyard stuff in our deck and we like playing with it more than they like playing with theirs. Greenside Watcher gives us the ability to untap a gate anytime we want, and that can be super important in our deck the way it's built, because we can untap Baldur's Gate multiple times in order to get tons and tons of mana out of it. Finally, we have Growth Spiral, which is the little brother of Eureka Moment. Draw a card, then put a land from your hand onto the battlefield, with the added benefit of it being a Simic card for Niv Mizzet to see when it drops on the board. Next, we have the land section of the deck, which I'm just combining with ramp and mana because, let's be honest, it's all for the same purpose, and it's half your deck anyway. The basic lands of the deck, we are running 10 of them, 2 of each basic, solely because, let's be honest, we'd like to go down to only 1 of each basic, but the budget will not allow for it. We are already 40 cents over the initial $15, which means we are a little strained for that extra money to begin with. Then we have 5 fetching lands, each of them very, very simple. Terramorphic Expanse and Evolving Wilds and Escape Tunnels can grab any basic land and put it on the battlefield tapped. Promising Vein and Shire Terrace can do the same thing for 1 mana while being an untapped land otherwise. I think more budget players should be adding these into their decks post haste. The cards are wonderful, and if I had more space and budget, I would put an Ash Barrens in here too for the same reason. Cards are great, but the next part of the deck is an area that I think I made a huge mistake in the original video. In the original Niv Mizzet deck, I forgot to put an Exotic Orchard. That's a really dumb thing for me to do. I don't even know how that mistake happened. But yeah, Exotic Orchard taps for a mana of any color that our opponent's lands can produce, and Command Tower is the opposite. It taps for any mana that our commander has in its color identity. I made a huge mistake originally when I did that, so apologies for that. As for the rest of the deck, they are all going to be land cards, so let's go ahead and get into those. Gruul Guildgate, Boros Guildgate, Izzet, Orzhov, Selesnya, Dimir, Azoros, Rakdos, Simic, and Golgari, all 10 guilds, all color combinations are accounted for. Gateway Plaza comes into the battlefield tapped and makes us sack another land when it comes into play, or not sack a land, but pay 1 or sack it. The card gives us 1 mana of any color, though, which means it does benefit from Gond Gate more so than other gates do. Heap Gate gives us mana of any color as well, which gives us Omni mana for Gond Gate. It can also create treasures in a pinch, which can give us the colors that we are missing for Niv Mizzet. Basilisk Gate, as I mentioned, is one of the win cons in the deck because it can give Mizzet all the power it needs to hit incredibly hard. Black Dragon Gate, Sea Gate, Citadel Gate, Cliff Gate, and Manor Gate are all thriving lands effectively with gate status attached to them. Gond Gate gives us the ability to make sure that none of our gates come into play tapped, and it can add mana from any color that the gates themselves could produce. So if this is on the board with any of our gates that can tap for manas of any color, then Gond Gate is officially another Omni land in the deck. Then we have Thran Portal, which a lot of the deck's budget is dedicated to. Honestly, you could cut this if you wanted to, but when it enters the battlefield, it comes into play tapped unless you have 2 or fewer other lands, so it is a fast land. You choose a basic land type, and then it is that type in addition to its other types, and then it can tap for 1 mana of that color alone. I'm going to be honest, the card is a take it or leave it card. If you wanted to cut it for a basic to keep the deck's price exactly under that $15 budget, you could, and it probably wouldn't hurt the deck at all. Finally, we have Baldur's Gate, which says that you can add X mana of any 1 color, where X is the number of gates you control. So this is going to be what we are going to use primarily to fuel things like Debt to the Deathless. We also will use it to make sure that we have all the mana we need to cast multiple control spells in a single turn, or pay for our commander's command tax, or untap it repeatedly for tons of mana to spend on just random bullcrap with our Gate untap strategy that we already have shown earlier. Honestly, Baldur's Gate does a ton of work, and I think it is a wonderful addition to any WUBRG deck. If you are trying to build a WUBRG deck on a budget, Gates are amazing, and Baldur's Gate gives you Nykthos effectively without having to spend Nykthos money. So definitely a great card. Finally, let's talk what you would do to upgrade this deck. And the obvious answer is just find the stronger version of some of our more clunky spells, things that are just making things get negative instead of flat out killing things. That's the obvious one, but there are some other ways you can go. One is making sure that the commander can blink more often, and to do so, you can use things like Thassa, Deep Dwelling, Conjurer Closet, and Teleportation Circle. Though bear in mind, you may run into the same issue I did with cards like this, where you can't get them with Niv Mizzet, so they can be kind of hard to find in your deck when he is your primary draw engine. Then we have Brago King Eternal, which can be grabbed with Niv Mizzet, which has a way to repeatedly blink our commander. And speaking of repeatable blink, the best option possible is probably Nahiri's Resolve, which lets us repeatedly blink our commander over and over again. At the beginning of our end step, we exile any number of non-token artifacts or creatures we control, and then we return them to the battlefield at the beginning of our next upkeep. It also gives them 1/0 in haste, so we never have to worry about the summoning sickness for our commander. Card's great, it's just a bit hard and unwieldy to use at that mana value, but it's still a fantastic way to repeatedly get our commander's ability. Another way you can get our commander's ability more than once is with something like Doppelgang. Clone our commander multiple times while also taking multiple copies of anything on the board. Use this to create multiple copies of Gates so that you have access to more of those as well. Honestly, if this card's price drops down below 50 cents, it may find its way into the main deck alongside Nahiri's Resolve. Speaking of mana stuff, though, Fabaro Elder will give you access to a mana of any color, up to 5 different mana pips, basically, as long as you've got creatures or permanents on the board that have those colors. So if just the Fabaro Elder is on the board, you can tap it and you'll get green-white. But if the commander's on the board, you can tap it and you will get straight-up WUBRG mana for doing so. So card is wonderful. You could also put a Bloom Tender in here as well, but the Bloom Tender is going to be harder to find because, again, it's not dual color like the Fabaro Elder is. Assassin's Trophy and Counter Squall give us stronger versions of already existing cards in the deck, just ways to blow up more things at that double mana pip value. Journey to Eternity is a fantastic way to recur any of our Mizzets and make sure that we can keep pressure on the board basically forever. It can also protect any of them for a long time, because nobody wants you to have access to the flip side of it that lets you reanimate creatures all the damn time. Nobody wants that. So if you throw this in the deck, follow it up with a board wipe so you can have that safe bit of mana. Speaking of lands you get from stuff, though, Expedition Map will be able to get you another Gate, since we do need all the Gate fetch humanly possible. It's just outside of the deck's budget right now. And another land you might want to think to add is Reliquary Tower, since the deck will draw lots and lots of cards. In my playtesting, the deck tends to have just enough draw to be at 8 or 9 cards at the end of most turns, so it can be a little unwieldy if you do not have access to some stuff like this or Decanter of Endless Water. Decanter is a few cents over budget for what I can allow in the deck right now, but if you're not playing with a strict budget, then you can obviously shove this in anywhere you want. And that about does it for everything there is to know about my version of this Niv Mizzet Reborn spell-slinging, controlling, burning deck. Honestly, having about 3 months of time to sit down with this deck and play it over and over and over again, starting at the Marietta the Gathering event that was held in my local area and going on to other tournaments with it, I've had a lot of time to figure out where I want this deck to sit. And I think this version of the deck is going to be far and above what I originally made, because it's been playing infinitely stronger in my hands lately. It doesn't help that at the time that I made the deck, we actually didn't have as many of the recent releases like Thunder Junction, which dropped the prices of a lot of the targets that I wanted to originally hit with Niv Mizzet's ability. Now that we have access to those at an easier budget, the deck is stronger than it was before, because we do have to balance that budget a little bit. Unfortunately, from the time that I remade this deck and now, about 40 or 45 cents were added to all of the cards in the deck, even with picking the cheapest printing. So the deck is technically 40 cents over budget now, and I'm a little upset about that because I was pretty happy with the budget that I managed to get it to. But it's fine. If the trends continue the way they are, that number should go down eventually anyway. But with all that said, let me know what you think in the comment section below. Hopefully you've had a chance to try this deck out yourself, either the original build or the current one. I hope you get a chance to play it. It is a blast, and it's probably my favorite $15 deck that I've made so far, and that's including the fact that Sephiroth is one of the $15 decks that I've made as well. I think I actually like Niv Mizzet in its $15 form far more, but unlike Sephiroth, I won't be making a full power version of this deck because, I'm gonna be honest, I'm a little terrified of what that might look like. So let me know what you think in the comment section below. Hit the like button if you haven't already, and as always, everyone, insert end of video tagline here. Hey, I just quickly want to give a thank you to all of my wonderful patrons who keep this show running. YouTube and Twitch are a pretty bumpy ride at the best of times, and the stability that Patreon provides me is worth more than I can say here. I'd also like to thank each and every one of my $20 and up patrons here, and they would be Red Joker, Britzkrieg, Cameron, Dren, Jemshin, Smiling DM, Poundini, Mabbity Babbity, Naomi, Isaac, Agamotto, Jordan, Ravi, Giuni, Kiratorian, Prisma, all of you, Sagitt, I'm not saying that part, and Starlight. And finally, thank you to everyone else that helps keep this channel alive. While you're here, why not check out another video? And thank you for watching.